vengeance!
Hit the pace car! What for? Because you hit every other damn thing out there, I want you to be perfect!
When I'm driving, I got a guy on the radio who talks to me. It's him. He talks to me.
Well, I wanna be a race car driver. Pretty girls eating from my hand, yeah. Wanna live a life of fun and danger. No sweaty working for the man, alright. Well, I wanna be a firefighter. Crew-led when the heat is on, yeah. Save my baby from the burning building. Take all the way to sprinklers on, alright.
No, he didn't slam you, he didn't bump you, he didn't nudge you, he rubbed you. And rubbing, son, is racing.
Hey race fans, welcome to the Hoobazoo Radio Network and welcome to Drafting the Circuits. My name is Frank Santoroski. I'll be your host for the next hour as we go over the weekend in racing and preview next week. Before we do that, let me introduce you to the panel tonight. I have with me Mr. Seth Eggert from Motorsports Tribune, Joey Barnes from IndyCar.com, and displaced race engineer Richard Youden. How's everybody doing tonight?
Very good, thank you.
Doing good.
All right, good to talk to you guys. We also have joining us on the panel a returning guest, a friend of the show, our friend Mr. Brock Beard, the owner and CEO of LastCar.info. We had Brock on the show last year where he was discussing the biography of J.D. McDuffie that he was writing. That book is now published and available. You can find it on Amazon, Google Books, or through WaldorfPublishing.com. The book is called J.D., The Life and Death of a Forgotten NASCAR Legend. And, you know, you can go to LastCar.info and get a lot of information about the book there. But with no further ado, Brock, welcome to the show, man. Good to have you back on. How you been?
Oh, been excellent. Excellent. Thank you for having me on.
All right, yeah, fantastic. So let's knock out the headlines of the week real quick because it has been a pretty interesting week in racing. NASCAR was having a great weekend. They had a sellout at Watkins Glen, which, when you think about how many people they can fit into that place, is mind-boggling. They've sold that place out 3 years in a row. We had a very popular winner with young Chase Elliott taking his first series win in grand fashion. And then, with all this great stuff going on, Monday comes out the news that Brian France, CEO of NASCAR, ran into a little legal trouble with the cops up there in Sag Harbor. So, pulled over, arrested, DUI, prescription drugs in his pocket that he did not have a prescription for. Just kind of a black eye all around. The dude stepped down from his role, and we'll have to see how all that plays out. But we're going to get into all that later within the hour. But first, Brock, let's talk about this book you have written, J.D. McDuffie, one of the last privateers in NASCAR. Not the last. I think Dave Marcus outlasted him a little bit, but he was doing things his own way on his own budget, bringing an old beat up truck to the track when others had 18-wheelers, and lost his life in 1991 at Watkins Glen, just prior to NASCAR booming so huge that he would have loved to have seen it. So now, Brock, you spent some time with JD's friends, family, crew members. You spent some time in Sanford, North Carolina. So just kind of talk us through what gave you the idea for this book and the whole process of what led you to write it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, J.D. McDuffie is really a figure that has consistently sprung up in like every facet of my interest in racing. Two of the things that really drew me to the sport were the races out here at the Sonoma Raceway outside about an hour from where I live, and also the independents and the underdog drivers that just don't get talked about that often. And certainly when you talk about road courses and you talk about independents, J.D. McDuffie comes up pretty quickly. And I never watched him race. I started actually following the sport in 1991. I didn't actually know about him really until about 2000 when I found a little die-cast car at a Martinez antique shop. And there wasn't a whole lot of information on there on that. Of course, on the internet back then, there was a lot of information on anything back then. But that really started my process to kind of start digging up some information on that, and looking at things online, starting to turn to books and articles, and then eventually by about 7 years ago, got a hold of actual crew members and family members, and it was just going to be like maybe doing some articles for the website like I'd done before, but pretty soon it was so much information. It's like, well, heck, let's make this a book. And quite honestly, it kind of surprised me how quickly it came together at that point, because it felt almost like it was already written, and it just came right out, and been very happy with the reception so far.
So you spent the weekend up at Watkins Glen, which was the site of JD's last race. You were there signing books. You had some folks that knew JD in tow with you. So tell us a little about this weekend. It must have been a bit emotional for some folks, right?
Oh, it was. I think for everybody in our group, it was very emotional. And again, a big thanks to Charlie Birch, the photographer who was standing in turn 5 at the time that the accident happened. He was a longtime JD supporter. He hosted us that week, as well as Rob Taylor up in Canada hosted myself and my brother. Linda and Wendy came over to Charlie's house before that. And then, of course, to Linda and Wendy themselves for making the trip up there. And it was just tremendous. I mean, that, again, kind of like the book, a lot of that trip just came together. We were originally just going to do a book signing, and then Charlie offered his house up, and then Linda was interested in coming up, and it just kind of came together. It turned out to be a bit more fast-paced than we thought it was going to be, because then some of our media contacts got wind of us being there, and as well as Charlie's as well up at the NBC Elmira affiliate up there. And it just turned into just a tremendous weekend, and it's really just starting to sink in.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a great time. Now, for our listeners who are not familiar who Wendy and Linda are, would you just go ahead and fill us in? Those are JD's family members, correct?
Oh, correct. Linda is JD McDuffie's daughter, and her spouse is Wendy McDuffie, who also in there. And both of them came along on the trip, made the drive straight from Denver all the way up to New York. And Linda was driving that whole time on the way up there, and they got there before we ever did. So she's definitely got a lot of her father in her. They met us up there, and that was the big thing that we did right away is, like one thing that maybe people have seen on my Twitter page there. We went to the Watkins Glen track right when, before activities really started up there, and we went down to turn 5. And like I say, Linda has never actually been to Watkins Glen at all. She wasn't there when the accident happened. And she certainly hadn't been to turn 5. And, you can only imagine how emotional it was for her. And certainly Charlie and myself were with her when that happened. And we were there to comfort her as well. But really, she said it was very cathartic when that happened as well, because I'm glad we did that as early as we did, because I think that allowed her to really kind of enjoy the weekend a bit more. And these people that came up to her that were, just such huge fans of her father and her family. And I think that really helped her through the weekend as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now turn 5 has been totally reconfigured. That bus stop chicane there, or the inner loop as they once called it, that was not there prior to JD's accident in 91. And that whole thing is there as a, kind of as a reaction to that accident that JD had. So, that I find really interesting. And I remember, I know you said you hadn't actually heard of JD or before you started with your project, and before he came into your project. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, Brock. I'm sorry, but
no, I got you.
Yeah. So, but I remember watching that race live. At the time I didn't work on Sundays. I devoted every Sunday to sit in front of television and watching the races. And I just remember seeing that crash, and JD's car flipped up, and Jimmy Means' car went under it. Jimmy looks into the net and immediately starts calling for help. You could tell it was bad. Did you get a chance to? You did have a chance to interview Jimmy Means for the book too, who was pretty good friends with JD.
Correct. And that was really the surprising thing with Jimmy and with a number of these other interviewees is that just about everybody I spoke to on this was like they couldn't wait to tell me as much stuff that they knew, as if nobody else had really talked to him or hadn't talked to him in quite a while about this. I really expected, especially with Jimmy Means, that it was going to be very hard to like extract a lot of information there. But Jimmy Means called me after I tried to reach him by email before. He called me right after he got back from Dale Jr.'s wedding over the winter. And the very first thing he told me is what he saw on August 11th, like right off the bat. Like, and we talked for probably an hour after that. So, and that was very typical from one interview person to the next, regardless of, what they saw or what they experienced. They couldn't wait to share it and make sure that they had their story out there. And that was really to the benefit of the book, because I put as much of that in there as possible. And the reception we've had so far on that people really seem to appreciate that. But I mean, part of it was being able to find these people and do the interviews, but a big part of that also was just how forthcoming so many of them were. And, really like you would get like half of one story from somebody and the other half from the other. They fit perfectly, put it in there. And it's like that really helped the project a whole lot.
I think that just goes to show how JD's story really needed to be told, that folks were so willing to say, yes, please tell this story,
It's very true, and I've actually gotten some criticism about the title of the book there, where I say it's a forgotten NASCAR legend. It almost seems kind of like a contradiction, because you have some of these people that certainly he wasn't forgotten to them, and they were able to share so much about him and all these really interesting stories, and we had so many more over the weekend. I actually just did a review of our race weekend that I posted on LastCar.info with other stuff that didn't even make it into the book, but really, I mean, I think at the larger part of it, like, they're maybe in the mainstream or maybe on some other net, the mainstream media and everything too, they don't really talk about JD that much or discuss them. And I think that's kind of what we were, where the title is still kind of appropriate. And because there's a lot of people that, I talked to during the race weekend, some of whom actually that follow the sport pretty closely that, never even heard of him. And that was kind of really startling to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Seth, I want to bring you into the conversation here. I know that you've got a couple questions for Brock here.
I do. While reading some of the excerpts for your book, I didn't realize that JD had been turned away, or NASCAR officials attempted to turn him away from the track several times. And was it disconcerting or disheartening for him from what you were able to gather? I mean, I know similar stories, granted, much different situation for Wendell Scott and some other drivers throughout the years, but it's one of those where you almost wouldn't expect something like that to happen.
Certainly. And I think that goes back to what you guys were talking about earlier, that JD just really missed out on the boom of the sport that just happened within the next couple of years. I mean, my goodness, certainly everything after the 1992 season with Richard Petty retiring, everything just went into the stratosphere on that. And I think maybe that was something that was playing a role in what was happening there, when you have all these big haulers coming in there, and NASCAR is trying to put forward this image of having the big money teams with the big sponsors on the side of the haulers and everything. And then they see this other guy come in and a guy that had been in the sport for so many years, and maybe he didn't have the assets to get a trailer like that. I mean, he did have one originally, but it just became impractical to use it under his budget. I think maybe that there was something going on with that at the time, and undoubtedly that bothered him. And actually, I mean, I'm not telling tales out of school on this, because I wrote about this on the website. Actually, we kind of faced the same problem about that in trying to promote this book at the racetrack. Our original plan was to actually have a book signing at the racetrack, and we had a deal worked out with the Speedway and other folks out there that were interested in it. We even had it all the way down to figuring out, where we were going to put the tables at the spot that we had. And then somebody at NASCAR stepped in and said, oh, no, we can't do that, and did all that. And it almost, threw a wrench into everything. And Thankfully the folks at Smalley's Garage, tremendous people down there, down in the village of Watkins Glen proper. They picked us up. They only asked for just a couple copies of the book, and they treated us just like family down there. And, it worked out perfectly. But, under the circumstances, I was talking about this with Lynn, and she said, hey, welcome to JD's world. So I can definitely say, certainly in a smaller sense, I definitely understand what he faced in those situations.
Now, going back to him being a privateer, granted, in the Cup Series, we really don't have any privateers anymore. We have a handful in the Xfinity Series, some in the Truck Series. Is there anyone that kind of reminds you of JD that's racing now, whether it's in the Xfinity Series or the Truck Series?
That's a good question. And actually, I faced this a little bit when I was looking on Twitter, and Jordan Anderson posted that picture of his Truck Series ride arriving at, I believe, Chicagoland a couple weeks ago. And he had this smaller truck, this little trailer, like a toy hauler he brought behind his truck. And he had this shot where it was just sitting between these two massive haulers. I think it was like Thor Sport and somebody else is there. And it reminded me instantly of this shot. I believe I said it was from 88, but I think I found it was from 89, actually, of the same thing. There was this shot of JD's old blue hauler, this old rollback hauler that looks like, almost like a flatbed, that was parked between these two massive haulers for A.J. Foyt and Ken Schrader. And it was exactly like, it was framed the same way and everything. And that just floored me. And Jordan very much, reminds me of that as well, that, he's worked with Mike Harmon, and Harmon is very much a driver that is in that owner-driver mold, and he has those ties. And I think that's what's inspired him to, run things the way that he does. And also on that same vein in the Xfinity Series, certainly Morgan Shepherd has to be brought into this discussion. Of course, Shepherd being successful with many teams over the years, especially running at Atlanta, but continuing on and running, Dave Marcus like many years after his last win, and continuing to run his own operation. Same experience I had at Darlington last September running into him. And, he had his small hauler there himself and his wife, and they were just hanging out. And, one of the coolest things was Shepherd just sitting there and, cracking open a Mellow Yellow and just relaxing there next to his car after he brought it in and took the carburetor off of it. And, just so much of a throwback. I mean, again, I never met JD, but I imagine the experience of walking by Old Blue in the late 80s, early 90s was just like that.
And one more question. Again, reading the book about how sometimes other teams would raise money for JD to get parts and stuff like that. It reminded me of a story from Daytona, I want to say 2010 or 2011 in practice. Jimmy Means' car ended up getting wrecked in an accident with Dale Jr. that he admitted that he had a part of it, and when he found out that they didn't have a backup, he originally tried to loan them one of his cars before NASCAR axed that because they had already presented it as one of his backups. So he personally had a car shipped from his shop here in the Carolinas down to Daytona for Means to have a car for its driver to race. And it just reminded me of that story. And it's one of those you don't hear about that often. And ironically, that story in your book that you mentioned, it involves Earnhardt Sr. and Childress. So my question is, is it almost a time that you're not going to see that ever again, whether it's the Xfinity Series or the Truck Series, the way teams are nowadays trying to save every dollar?
I would hope that there's there's still times where you see that kind of cooperation between teams. And if I'm understanding your question correctly, seeing another time where maybe like a major funded operation is helping an independent team, you mean? Okay, yes. I would think that would still, I would hope that would still happen. I mean, the thing is with that one, that is such an exceptional situation on a lot of fronts there, because Dale Jr. and Jimmy Means' son Brad, they grew up, as kids, just hanging out at the haulers there. And as you know, that's another story that's brought up in the book there too. And that connection that they have undoubtedly was a big part of that. I think they talked about that a little bit on their podcast as well just last week. But I mean, I say it's exceptional in that sense because there's that tie between Junior and Means, but I'm hopeful that, maybe that's not the exception, that, somebody wrecks or somebody loses a car like that situation, and you have a lot of teams pitch in. I now that I mentioned that, one thing that actually does kind of remind me of is back in 2013 in the Truck Series when Norm Benning wrecked, beat up that truck trying to get that thing into the field in the last chance qualifier, and all those people that were just kind of surrounding his truck and just lifting it up and getting it all ready for the race. There wasn't a situation quite as tremendous as Junior's there, where he was actually bringing a whole other car. But certainly, a huge showing of these teams helping each other there. So, another example that's more recent than the Bobby Santos situation there with the backup car. So, hopefully that is a sign that there's a trend with that. I'd like to see it in the Cup Series. It's a shame that both of us are talking about things that have happened in the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series here. I don't suppose we're seeing that as much in Cup, but maybe it would start happening. I don't know, but and maybe it happens more often than we see it. I mean, that's when I do my media coverage out at the track, that's why I really try to push to get my credentials through at all these tracks there, because I'm anxious to see what's happening really behind the scenes, and sometimes it's entirely possible it's happening a lot and it's just not getting seen or talked about.
All right, now, Brock, I want to talk to you a little bit about the process of getting your book to press. There are a lot of folks out there that feel like they have a story to tell, and there's a lot more avenues for an author to get some stuff to press with ebooks and whatnot. Getting a publisher to be interested used to be a daunting process. So, how difficult was it for you to strike the deal with Waldorf? And do you have any advice for any kind of up and coming writer, somebody who would like to publish a novel or publish a biography?
I do. I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, because like you said, it's so competitive these days, and when you're publishing books, you're not just competing against other books; you're competing against other forms of entertainment, whether it be YouTube or Netflix or anything else. So you really, persistence, I would say, is the biggest thing that really pays off. And I know that's easier said than done, but the more the more time you commit to it, and the more you're able to push it out there, usually that is going to prevail. Maybe not right away, but eventually. I mean, I'll tell you, with this book here, there was the first publisher that we approached on this that actually was accepting submissions, because that's the first obstacle you got to go over. A lot of publishers that I was approaching, they were only interested in young adult novels and stuff like that. And, I'm not writing anything about like vampires or archers or anything like that. So, when you're going against the grain and you're writing something a little different that people aren't expecting, you kind of have to be a bit more creative there. And I approached one publisher about this book that was interested in it, and when I told them who it was actually about, they didn't jump for it, and they said that nobody's going to buy a book about a loser. That was actually their words. And I was thinking, well, okay, if you're going to show that little commitment to, or think this little of this project, I don't want you promoting this book, because I know you're not going to have your heart in it. And luckily, eventually I was able to track down Waldorf, who have been absolutely tremendous in this. The great thing, I would say, it's kind of a long answer to this question, but for first-time authors, I would highly recommend Waldorf, quite honestly. They are a small publisher out of Texas. They are very much geared towards like first-time authors and people trying to get their names out there. They are very dependent on the social media presence of their authors. So if you have that kind of presence or a way to kind of develop it, that's certainly something they look at. I mean, there's a lot of other things they look at too. It's not a rubber stamp by any means. They got to approve anything for their catalog and see how it goes. But if you're able to kind of help them out, and you're able to work with them, they will absolutely help you a lot. And as you can see, they did a very nice job getting the cover illustration together and getting it formatted and all that stuff there. So, again, I'm very pleased that Waldorf showed interest in it. They've been very supportive of this project. And again, for first-time authors out there, I would recommend them.
Okay, fantastic. So I want to ask you one more thing now. Did you got a chance to go spend some time in Sanford, North Carolina, little bricklaying town, or no?
Oh yes, I did go to Sanford last September as part of we were covering the race in Darlington that week, and so that was a tremendous trip. We were able to spend about a week down there, and we visited with that's where we visited with Wilbur Thomas and Jimmy Bird, who go way back with JD, back to even before NASCAR, and we did interviews with them out there, and Sanford is a really interesting place, and again another place much like Watkins Glen where you don't have to you say JD and people know who you're talking about. You don't have to explain anything about it, and his gravesite out there is still regularly visited. When we did the trip out there was a 9/16 wrench, I believe was the size of it, that was in the flower holder. Like there's still people coming out there that very much care about him, and that was before the book was even published. At that, so I hope that in some small way this is getting even more attention out there, and for those of you in the Raleigh Durham area, I would recommend checking out Sanford, because there's a lot of people out there and a lot of places that still definitely remember him.
All right, well, fantastic. So let's talk about the race at Watkins Glen this weekend, and you were there for the race. I mean, did you have an opportunity to just kind of sit and soak in the race and watch it, or were you too busy with book signings and whatnot?
I did. I mean, the only book signing we had at the actual weekend was on Saturday night, which was cool because, of course, the significance of Saturday night in 1991 was when JD won the celebrity race at the Owego Speedway. So it was nice to kind of have a tie-in with that. But yeah, I mean, the Xfinity race, we weren't able to stay there too long. We had to get ready for the signing that evening. But we did see a little bit of the rain racing that weekend and all that too, and that was fun. But the Cup race, yeah, we saw the full thing on that. I was in turn 1 for that race. My brother was over in turn 10. We got in there like just before they sold out there when my credential request fell through. But that was a whole other story. But there we got that worked out there, and it was tremendous. I mean, my goodness. I mean, I'm used to the races at Sonoma, and I've been going there since '92. Watkins Glen is just a whole other ball game. Huge facility, ridiculous speeds going into those corners, and particularly in this one, it's a
high commitment track. Yeah.
It is, and in this one, it seemed. I mean, maybe it just plays different in person than on TV. They seemed so much more aggressive out there this time. I mean, right from the start, there you had like the 4 best guys up front, and they were going side by side through the S's in turn 5, and then Jimmy Johnson. I know he didn't have like the best run there, but in the first part of it, that was one thing I noticed lap after lap. He was just knifing that thing into turn 1. Just getting under this guy, getting under that guy, and getting it up there. And maybe that was one thing that got him looped around there at the other end of the course there towards the end. But he was having, I was really impressed with him. And Chase Elliott, I was convinced that somebody put Tommy Kendall in that thing at the last second, because he just put on a master class out there. I mean, nobody passes Kyle Busch on a road course, and much less, that holds off Martin Truex at the finish. That is insane. So, kudos to Chase. I've been hard on him, very critical of him in the past, and in many ways, I always kind of viewed him as kind of the antithesis of some of the drivers I talk about that are kind of the ones that don't get talked about that much and everything. But he made a believer out of me. I take back everything bad I ever said about him.
Yeah, this is coming on the heels of the announcement that his dad Bill is going to hop in an Xfinity car at Road America coming up.
Exactly. Oh my gosh.
62 years old. I can't wait to see that. So, but let me turn my attention to Seth. You're our resident NASCAR analyst since Gray is off on assignment this weekend. So, I thought the Xfinity race was quite entertaining, and the Cup race was quite good too. So, what are your takeaways from the weekend at Watkins Glen prior to Monday's legal issues?
Well, for the Xfinity race, the only thing I'm disappointed is how long it took them to repair the tire barrier after Vinnie Miller hydroplaned into it in turn 1. As a result, we didn't get to see any real strategy as far as the track drying and team switching to dry tires. By the time they had it fixed, the bulk of the track was dry. Otherwise, the Xfinity Series race was very entertaining. It was interesting to see dry stage, one wet stage, and then back to dry. The Cup race, it was entertaining. Kyle Busch and Chase Elliott probably had the best cars. Kyle, on a pit stop, they weren't able to get the car fueled. That dropped him back to about 19th with about 20 laps to go, and he was able to get all the way back up to third. Denny Hamlin had an atrocious pit stop, almost injured two of his crew members when he ran over an air hose and it whipped across both their faces. Chase Elliott also almost ran over a crew member who went over his hood and landed in, I forget whose pit stall it was, but he made the motion that he was safe, and the air gun landed in his hands as he was doing that. So I thought that was kind of funny, but overall, it was a good battle to the end between Chase Elliott and Martin Truex Jr., and what impressed me was on the final lap going into turn one, Chase was wheel hopping, and he said in the interview afterwards, his choices were to either spin out or pop it into first gear, over-rev the engine to keep from spinning out, and that's what let Truex catch all the way back up to him. And Truex had said even if he got around him or moved him, that he was going to run out of fuel going into turn 7, and that Chase was going to just sweep back by him. So it was just an epic battle between the two drivers.
Yeah, it was really good. I would have thought that Chase's first win would have come at some place like Charlotte or Chicagoland or something like that. But for him to win at Watkins Glen, I mean, what a way to kind of put your mark on the series and say, hey, here I am. I got that monkey off my back, and I'm ready to go.
Well, Chase won at Watkins Glen, his first race. His father, Bill, won his first race at Riverside. And Chase is now just one of 4 drivers in the Cup Series to earn their first win at Watkins Glen, joining Steve Park, Marcus Ambrose, and A.J. Allmendinger.
And those guys went on to win how many Cup championships?
Bill won one.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Ringers. Yep. So, but Chase isn't a ringer. I mean, Chase is he's the future of NASCAR, and at the same time, this is Chevy's second win on the season, where Chevy has been, they won the 500 at the beginning of the season, and we've been talking, and I'm so, kind of sad that Gray's not on the show, so we'd be talking about Chevy getting better, but here's another win for Chevy.
Well, the last 3 weeks, Hendrick Motorsports especially has improved their performance, and ironically, it was 5 weeks ago that they finally got their own OSS system at their shop. So I'd almost put it on what they've learned from their own OSS system is definitely being applied at the track, and that's shown the marked improvement of that team. This was also their 250th win as an organization. In their first 17 years, they had 100 wins. In the most recent 17 years, the team has earned 150 wins.
Seth, I'm so glad you know all these numbers.
I can
never keep them all straight. Yeah, like Brock would tell you how many last places they had. You could tell me how many wins they have. It's awesome having both you guys on at the same time. So now, Richard, you've been kind of quiet tonight, but you're well steeped in NASCAR, having worked in there for a couple of years. What were your thoughts about Watkins Glen and the race, either the Xfinity or the Cup one?
Firstly, watching the Xfinity race, it was disappointing that you didn't get to see more of the action and the driver judgment calls as the track was getting wet and the track was drying. That was, I appreciate they had to repair the safety barriers there, but we did lose something of a black art amongst some of these drivers, some of the more experienced drivers. But I thought it was a fantastic race, and that was great to see. It was surprising, there's quite a few of those Cup drivers obviously sort of stepped down for the Saturday race to get a bit of experience out there, which was it was good to see. And from Chase Elliott's standpoint, it was good to see him finally get that win. I mean, it was 7, 8 second places I think he'd had up to that point, so fantastic. And it wasn't a fluke win like some of the more recent first time winners have arguably been. He he dominated that race. He led 50-odd laps, wasn't it? Or 40 laps out of 70? Or 90, however many there were. He had a good run there. I can't remember the exact number.
52 out of 90.
Well, so well over half. So he deserved that, and to hold off Truex at the end there, and to hold off Kyle Busch and to race head to head with those guys and beat them fair and square. Yeah, good on him there, and hopefully that'll give him that little bit of confidence when it comes to some of those other tracks, and he can start converting those second places into wins.
Yeah, good run. Now, Brock, who finished last?
So that was Joey Logano, his first last place finish since the second article I ever wrote back in 2009.
See, you had that right on the tip of your tongue, man. That's what I love about you, man. So.
Oh, thank you. That was a crazy story, wasn't it? I mean, I'm still trying to pick apart what the heck happened over there.
Yeah,
like my brother was at turn 10, and he got video of that 22 running off the course, and he never actually hit anything. He looked like he still had control of it.
What happened was in turn 5, he ran into the back of AJ Allmendinger. It broke the oil cooler and the radiator. So by the time he got to turn 6, he slammed on the brakes, and the car just went straight because of the fluid on the tires. He went to pit road, and Todd Gordon immediately said for him to go to the garage. However, because it was damaged, he was on the damaged vehicle policy. And as soon as he entered the garage, he was out. The team claimed they didn't know they were on the DVP until they got to the garage. 18 months into this policy, there's no excuse for the team not to know when they are or are not on that policy.
Interesting. Well, interesting rule situation. I mean, that's, kind of the thing making me, I wasn't really listening to the officials' radio at the time that happened, but I'm curious, is there something that's communicated over the radio where they say, like the 22's on the damage clock, or is it just something that they just kind of know?
You got to know it.
You got to know it, and it is communicated to them. It's just by the time it's communicated to them, they're already on the clock, and sometimes they may have been on the clock for about 5 seconds. Sometimes it could be about 10 or 15 seconds. It really depends on the track and the situation.
Most for that 5-minute damage clock, most teams will have a automatic timer that's on the pit box, so they'll have a pretty good idea of where they sit in that 5-minute window, and also they'll automatically reset when they lap at the predetermined reset lap time is set prior to the race. Now, here's an interesting question, actually, thinking about it. Say at Watkins Glen, you have, you've got your 5-minute damage window, and that window, that 5 minutes are reset once you achieve a minimum racing speed. Now, what happens if it's raining and you can't achieve minimum speed, even though your car isn't damaged anymore? It's an interesting question.
I guess we would find out when that situation arises.
Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing about that part of it too, is that you're saying also, Seth, that it was the damage from running into the back of the 47 that constituted the damage that incurred the start of the crash clock. It wasn't the moment that he ran off the course, because of course he didn't hit anything when he ran off the course.
The thing is, the clock doesn't start until he enters pit road, and this year it's actually a 6-minute clock, but it doesn't start until he enters pit road. So from the time he went off course, which is when they definitely knew they had something wrong with the car, to the time he entered pit road was about a minute to 2 minutes. In that time, they should have known they were on the DVP. That being said, the damage to the oil cooler, Todd Gordon admitted on the radio Monday morning that they were done for the day. There was nothing they would have been able to do. But at the time, they were arguing with NASCAR that they had not known they were on the policy.
Interesting.
See,
this is this kind of thing I love about last place finishers. There's always some little quirk in the law there, and you see that, and that was something I didn't even know here. So kudos to you, Seth.
Now, Joey, you've been quiet tonight, so I want to kind of bring you into the conversation. You get a chance to watch the Cup cars at the Glen?
I did. I thought it was a good race. I thought it was interesting, kind of I don't know another word to use other than maybe stigma of how everything kind of fit together, because you've got that situation with Chase Elliott, who can't win to save his life for a long, long time. It took 98 starts. On the 99th, he finally got it. And you turn right around, and who's he trying to fend off? He's trying to fend off a guy who was the other lovable loser of yesteryear, who kept digging and kept fighting and kept scrapping and was always at the wrong end of the wins. And here he turns around and ends up, fending off Martin Truex Jr. And I thought it was so funny that towards the end of this race, really both of them you could tell were going for it, because each one was slipping up in different parts of the track. If it wasn't Chase Elliott slipping up in turn one there, it was Martin Truex, flipping there, or not flipping, but sliding there through the S's. And I just thought it was very interesting to see that, to see also how Chase was through the bus stop. I mean, it just seemed like each one was trying so hard and kept digging that it ended up being a really good slug match there at the end. But, and kudos to Chase on the win, obviously. It was kind of cool to also see the symmetry there with him and his dad, Bill, having his first win, like what Seth alluded to. But, looking at the fact that at the end of this race, he runs out of fuel, and it's Jimmy Johnson, a 7-time champ, your teammate, who's giving you a push back to victory lane. So to see that, to see the ovation from the fans and what seemed like it was a really good crowd, and also just see all the drivers come to victory lane and give their congratulations to him, just shows everything that they appreciate about this kid, shows the respect that they give this kid. And I think that, I don't know, I honestly, I think about this moment and I think about the 98 Daytona 500 in some respects, because it reminds me instantly after Senior won, all the crew members coming out to pit road and giving their congratulations to Senior, because they knew how long he'd been at this and never gotten that win at Daytona. And I look at Chase, and obviously there's two opposites, two parallels in some respects, though, with the fact that this kid had been at it for so long, shown the fight and the spirit, and finally got that job done, and obviously has the respect of his peers. And I thought it was a really cool moment in many respects, from who he's fending off to relating to his dad, to a 7-time champ pushing to the victory lane. So it was a good race for him, and I thought it was a great weekend for NASCAR until Monday.
Yeah. So speaking of Monday, who wants to weigh in on that first? Anybody go?
Well, here, I'll tell you my side of that. We had just finished up on, everybody's like, yeah, we're all high-fiving each other. It's like, look, there's a great race to cap this off, and publishers going to be all excited about the book, and everybody's going to be talking about, the good things about this. And we drove up, my brother and I were on this trip here. We were driving away from Charlie's place up the Finger Lakes, stopped at this little cafe at the top of the lake there, and we were sitting down, opened the phone, and Speed Sport News says that Brian France caught for the DUI with possession of controlled substances. And I'm like, is this the Onion? Oh, no, this can't be real. No, and then hit the link. It was like, oh. And that was kind of the start of it right there.
I was over at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, actually, for the IndyCar test that they were having with Firestone and testing the new Aero kits. And I asked a couple of other people that were there, is TMZ a credible source for news? And both of them said yes. So I read them the headline, and both of their eyes got very, very large when they heard that. So that was my introduction to what happened there.
Either way, it's a black eye for NASCAR. Regardless, him taking a leave of absence, having Jim France, his uncle, the brother of Bill France Jr., taking over. It was a black eye not only because he was arrested for DUI and controlled substance. He very clearly was not at the track, as he has claimed to have been over the past 2 or 3 years, with multiple drivers calling him out on it, most vocally Brad Keselowski, because where he got pulled over on Sunday night was a good, I think, 4 or 5 hour drive from the track, and at the time he got pulled over, there's no way for him to get there.
Long Island is nowhere near Watkins Glen. Watkins Glen is closer to the Poconos, and Long Island is way out there in the harbor. So, but the long and short of it is, people have been calling for him to be not in charge of NASCAR for a while now. He's kind of made all their wishes come true. So I don't see him coming back in the foreseeable future. What is your thoughts for the future leadership of NASCAR?
Well, I'm optimistic about having Jim France in that role because he is the one who negotiated the purchase of ARCA. He's the one who helped negotiate, if I remember correctly, the merger between American Le Mans and Grand Am. And he's also been negotiating a rules package, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, over in Le Mans to help allow teams from the U.S. to compete more easily there.
I can't speak to that last one.
Well, the LMP2 situation that just got released, though, with the state of the series with IMSA, I mean, they kind of moved the LMP2 to be on a more global platform versus what they were dealing with. So, I mean, there's something to be said with that, perhaps. Yeah. I tell you this, we could get caught up in the negatives of everything that entails with this because obviously it is a black eye for the sport. It's a negative for the series in many respects. But, we see in the NFL, like, for instance, Jim Irsay got, pulled over DUI a few years back. I mean, these things, people, I don't want to say people forget and move on, but people are willing to forgive and move past. And I think in this situation, there's still a lot of details that we need to learn. I think there's a lot of things still that need to be found out to see if it even makes sense for Brian France to come back and take over back his role with NASCAR. But that all aside, I think that there's a few things that are incredibly important for the leadership of NASCAR moving forward, and that is, first and foremost, that person has NASCAR's best interest, and that includes the people that work within it. And I think, from that standpoint, you're looking at a situation where, we see all the time, we hear stories all the time. I mean, about back in the day, Bill France, would sit there and open the door to whoever was going to come in. And you've got criticisms, you've got things you want to talk about when it comes to sport, ways to improve the sport. He would be the first person that you would talk to and tell everything to, and he'd be the first one to take it all in and figure out what to do and kind of move forward with those things. And I think that we need more of that, and we need definitely somebody that's at the track, all 36 races, 38 non-points races, whatever. Moving forward, you need that because that's going to be what drives everything forward. People can see BS from a mile away nowadays with the way social media is, and so I think when you run into a situation where you're trying to get all these fans involved in the sport and you're trying to invoke all this passion, well, it starts at the top and it moves its way down just like a waterfall. And I think that with this situation, the fans could tell that if Brian France isn't quite as invested, that passion kind of, you get that vibe or that synergy, and it works its way and filters its way throughout the rest of the field and throughout the rest of the sport. And I think that fans can see that. And I think that's part of the reason why the passion just quite isn't what it was. And maybe we can get it back. I think we can. But I think it's going to take that kind of leadership moving forward in order to get people reinvested in the sport.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, that maybe it's a good thing to have this guy out for a while. At the same time, I have to think to myself, I mean, you're worth a couple of $1 million. Why can't you pay somebody to drive you around? You know what I mean? It's just, but you see these things happen, and oh well. But that's neither here nor there. But we'll just have to see what's next for NASCAR. But let's turn our attention to Formula One for a little bit, Richard.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
So we've had a lot of stuff happen in Formula One. Most recently, Danny Ricciardo was leaving Red Bull and going to Renault.
Yep, so last Friday they had the synchronized press release saying that Daniel Ricciardo is leaving Red Bull, and then within 15 minutes, Renault announcing that he's going to be partnering Nico Hülkenberg. Now, the most interesting thing that I've taken out of all of this is that there's been no confirmation about Ricciardo's replacement. So, Carlos Sainz has been on the Red Bull Young Driver Program for a number of years now, come through Toro Rosso. He's on loan to Renault this year, and from Red Bull, and it's like, well, if he was going to be at Red Bull next year, that would have been the immediate announcement. It'd been Danny's leaving and Carlos is replacing him, but that hasn't happened. So obviously Red Bull are looking at somebody else. Who is there? Are they going to promote Pierre Gasly from Toro Rosso? Probably a little bit too soon. I think they learned that with Danny Kvyat. They pushed him a little bit too soon into that role. Who else is available that could take that? McLaren have been talking about Sainz. Sainz would be an interesting opportunity at McLaren. But then, who do they get rid of? They've got Stoffel Van Dorn there. They've got guys like Lando Norris waiting in the wings. Is Alonso a potential replacement for Ricciardo at Red Bull? With that Honda link, whether he'd want to go back to that situation. I'm sure he'd take the drive if it became available to him. So it's very interesting to see how all this pans out. So that was last week, and of course, last couple of days we've had the other wrench in the driver market for next year, in that Lance Stroll's father, is heading up the consortium which has bought out Force India. So you're looking at there's going to be a definite move there, with Lance Stroll leaving Williams and going over to Force India or whatever they may be called, going through next year. I believe one of the issues that they've been negotiating is that if they rename the team to Force Canada or whatever it may be, they lose the TV rights from this year. So that's one of the big political things. You saw last time we saw this was when Sauber renamed themselves BMW Sauber, powered by Ferrari, which is all very unusual. But that was purely for the reasons that they wanted to keep the TV prize money.
So my question is this, though: do we know for sure with this situation with Lawrence Stroll that Force India, with the new ownership, loses the prize money at year's end, or is that still something
I don't know. That's been... I mean, there has been 3 teams that have opposed it, and my understanding is that it would have to be a unanimous decision. And there's also news today that each team is losing around £20 million, $30 million in prize money due to a drop in Formula One revenue. So there's a big hit going on there, and some of these smaller teams that did not agree to it. I know Williams didn't agree. Believe
McLaren and Renault, I believe.
Yeah, they all said no. And at the end of the day, it's a competitive industry, and you can't. You've got to look after your own staff. You've got to look after your own bills. So I don't blame them too much. It's the politics of how the sport's run, unfortunately. Whether it's right or not, I don't know. But I don't know what the long-term aim is there. Now, there are certain ways of massaging the massaging the prize money allocation. I know in the past that some teams have been given an advance on their prize money to get them through to the end of the season. Now, it could be that one of the teams that I know that has been given an advance on the prize money in the past is one of the teams that opposed the them getting that money. So maybe they've said, well, look, hey, in the past you've been giving your prize money early, so we're going to give these guys the prize money early, and you don't really have a leg to stand on in your argument that it's not fair. So, that could all be happening. But there's obviously, that again opens up the driver market. Who's going to stay at Force India? Are Mercedes going to have such an impact there? Because the big rumour was that Ocon was going to go to Renault to partner Hülkenberg, but of course now that Renault seat's taken up, is Ocon going to stay at Force India and Perez be out? And then Perez, because he's got quite a bit of cash flowing around with Carlos Sims backing the Mexican second or third richest man in the world. So there's a little bit of money there from Perez. So would he be a potential replacement at Williams and take some of that money over to Williams? Who knows? It's
that's the big thing that I've been wondering about. Is like, so what happens to Williams now? Because they've had Lawrence Stroll basically propped them up for the last 2 seasons.
Yeah. And this year is the end of their Martini sponsorship deal.
Yep. So that money's not coming in. So they've got to find somebody.
Yeah. So that's unfortunately, it's a horrible thing to say, but it's looking a little bit dicey at Williams, I think. And you've seen from the performance this year what happens when, and again, no disrespect to Sergei Sorokin and Lance Stroll, but neither of them are top-level drivers. You see what happens to the car's performance when you have two drivers that are inexperienced, especially in racing, but also especially in car development. So, it's interesting times there.
I tell you what, I really like a lot of the situation that's played out over the last couple of weeks in Formula One, though. Like, when you look at Daniel Ricciardo deciding not to wait on the driver's market and allow it to come to him and maybe be the odd man out, understanding that, and if I'm in his shoes, I'm looking at how everybody's treating me at Red Bull. Oh, yeah. And it's like, this doesn't make any sense. You're going to give it to this kid whenever I've got, 6-7 wins and I've finished third in the championship twice in the last 4 years. And, I feel a little disrespected because you haven't exactly given me a car that's capable of actually winning a championship. You've given me one that can win a few races here and there, but not on a consistent basis, and I think I've made the most of it. So kudos to him for going to a factory team, and we all believe that. I know, Richard, you and I talked, and we feel like Renault's definitely on the up, and they're going to continue to be on the up with some of the hirings that they've made. I think it's interesting now to see, like you said, is Carlos Sainz, is that the choice for Red Bull? You'd like to think so, because he matched Verstappen for the most part at Toro Rosso and makes all the sense.
But why hasn't it already been announced?
Exactly.
Surely it would have been a perfect opportunity to sort of put this whole rumour mill to bed and say, right, it's just a basic swap.
Yeah.
It would have been. But the fact they haven't done that makes me think that they've decided not to pursue that movement.
And I tell you what, I think that it's a mistake for Toto Wolff to let Esteban Ocon go. I think that if he doesn't stay within a Mercedes camp, and in this case it would have to be either Force India or Williams at this point, if they lose him to a team like Red Bull, there's going to be hell to pay because he's going to make them pay because he is incredibly talented, just like Van Dorn is at McLaren. And obviously Lando Norris is pretty touted in his own right, being there with the junior seat. But I think that, also looking at this situation with Force India and Williams, if I'm Williams, I know the money hurts. And I don't expect them to approve anything that's going to help out Force India from this point on. But I think that, like you had said, two drivers who, let's be honest, they're obviously Ed Stroll didn't learn much from Felipe Massa when it comes to trying to develop a car. Otherwise, this car would be a little bit better. I mean, you got Paddy Lowe heading up that program. Paddy Lowe, the same Paddy Lowe that helped build the Mercedes program right now. I wonder, who out there, maybe it's Sergio Perez with that money, but considering his long-standing, with Force India, maybe he's wanting to take that Red Bull seat and take that money and maybe help inject it with the Red Bull seat. That would be interesting. But, all things considered, I like the idea that maybe they can get a driver that's more suitable to help build that thing up, moving forward. So, we'll see. There's a lot of dominoes still left to fall. The big ones, obviously, Alonso. Could he be the Red Bull man? Could he be the IndyCar guy? There's a wide range for him. He's the one guy that can do whatever he wants.
It makes me think. It makes me wonder. Because as I say, remember around the time of Indy, and of course, that's when all the IndyCar gets all this publicity. But there's a lot of talk of Alonso around IndyCar, and everybody was saying the deal had been done. But it's gone very, very, very quiet these last few weeks and months. And I'm wondering if, because the drivers talk to each other.
Yeah.
I wonder if Alonso didn't know that this Red Bull seat was going to become available for 2019 and just say, I'm just going to just take my time a little bit here.
It's all affiliated with Renault. It's just got that badging. So,
well, yeah, until next year.
Yeah. But I'll say this, though. The one guy that we're forgetting about, and I don't think he's in line for the Red Bull seat, but I think it's interesting to see where everything aligns. And what we are forgetting is Kevin Magnussen's seat is pretty safe at Haas. Clearly he's driven extraordinarily well this year. But I think Roman Grosjean is the guy that's in question, and it makes me wonder, if we see him go by the wayside, might we see Sergio Perez, a North American driver, try his hand with a North American team? perhaps, and help infuse. There's a lot of dominoes still.
I don't think that Mr. Ferrucci is going to be getting that seat anytime soon, is it?
I don't believe so. No, I think he'd be lucky to get an IndyCar seat right now.
Yeah,
honestly, that was a pretty bad mistake, and I think that hopefully he'll learn from it and move forward and hopefully somebody will give him another opportunity, because the talent, he's clearly talented, clearly fast, and we've seen just fast guys lose their head. Emotion is part of the sport. It's a part of any sport, and he's young. I mean, we've all been. I mean, I was an athlete in my younger days, and I was certainly a guy that would talk and say a bunch of stuff, and I think a lot of people are the same way. So, it's something to learn from moving forward, but I think that he'll certainly get an opportunity somewhere. Just don't know where.
All right, and we don't know where, but, guys, we are up against the clock. We got about a minute left. But now, Chris, you were at the Road America this weekend for the IMSA race. I just want you to give us a real quick 30-second overview of that before we go off the air. And I'm sorry that we're up against the clock. So, Chris, floor is yours.
Really, it was all about heartbreak. Jordan Taylor was going to win the race for Wayne Taylor Racing, but unfortunately his fuel didn't last. He had to stop. Then Mazda Team Yost looked like they were going to win the race, and then they had to stop with a couple of laps to go. And Ray Letterman and Lanigan looked like they were going to win in GTLM, but they didn't even make it to the pit lane because it's all uphill. So it ended up being Colin Braun winning his second race in a row. And in GTLM, the 67 Ford GT won over there. And Wright Motorsports finally got their first win of the season with Christina Nielsen and Patrick Long, which was great for them because the last race for the series at Lime Rock, they had a bad left rear tire that caused them to drop from second to last in their class in the last 30 minutes of the race. The kink took no prisoners this weekend. There were at least 4 major accidents there. Thankfully, all drivers were okay. And I'd like to make a quick proposition that we get Road America to be a 6-hour race in the next couple of years, because 2 hours and 40 minutes is not nearly enough for that great track.
Okay, very fast thing. So, NASCAR is where next weekend? Michigan?
Yep.
Correct? Okay. Everybody has about 1 second to make a pick. Brock, you're first.
Truex.
Okay, and who's last?
Keselowski.
Oh, man. Killing me, Smalls. Seth.
I'm going to go with Kyle Busch.
All right, Chris.
Larson.
Joey.
Suarez.
Richard.
Blaney.
All right, I'll go with Denny Hamlin. Why not? But guys, we are out of time, man. I'm so I'm so sorry. We could have gone another 30 minutes with this show. Great panel tonight. Brock, I really want to thank you for coming on the show. Guys, get on lastcar.info. Get some information about that book. JD is the title of the book. JD, The Life and Death of a Forgotten NASCAR Legend. It's a great read. You will enjoy it. Seth, thanks for coming on. Christopher, Joey, Richard, I appreciate all you guys every week, but I want to thank iHeartRadio, I want to thank the Hoobazoo Radio Network, and I want to thank all you folks that listen to us every week. Have a good night. Talk to you next week.
WHOOBAZOO, that's Hoobazoo.com.
Enter website, enter website, enter website, enter website.